Welcome again. This is Pastor Bob Douglas, and I want to talk to you again about heroes and villains. That was our discussion on our last video. You can look back and see that one, but it was a discussion about defining the terms we were going to use about heroes and villains. Because through history has been made up of a whole interesting mixture of both. Most of us, as we would learn about heroes and villains, would want to be, desire to be, hunger to be heroes, and certainly would want to avoid being a villain. But sometimes it's not as easy as just one of the examples we used last time was the firemen running in on 9/11 and trying to climb those stairs and rescue people from the burning towers. We have other ones we have today. I mean, we have the stories of the first responders plunging into the icy Potomac River trying to find anyone who, from the airline accident, that might be alive yet in the water, clinging to life with a bubble of air under the water that apparently they weren't going to find. But heroes, when we remember those, aren't always the big people, strong of body, robust. Heroes are different than that. They can be just about anybody, man or woman, child, able-bodied and disabled in many ways. One of my good friends, who I considered an absolute hero, spent almost all of his entire adult life confined to a wheelchair. He had a nice electric one, but very limited use of his hands. But that didn't stop him from being a hero of the first order. So we've got to do some unpacking. What does a real hero look like? How does he build a lifetime, a lifestyle, a desire to live all the way through their lives as a hero? God gave us that outline. And this is where the Bible study comes. That is the foundation of our study today. Jesus did a lot of wonderful stories. He drew many word pictures, and one of my favorite ones comes at the end, the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount, which is chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew. And he wrapped up the story of all that whole long message by talking about the wise and the foolish builders. And the wise builders built their lives, their families, their relationships on a rock, which meant that they believed what he said and they lived according to his instructions. And the foolish builder built their lives, invested their time, set different priorities, but they built their life on sand. And when the storms of life come, which they come for both the wise and the foolish, the sand was washed away. The foundation of the house was swept away, and the entire thing collapsed and crushed them all. It was a tragic end that happens with people who do not follow the instructions Jesus gave us to be heroes. Let me explain what I'm talking about before I go into the illustration I have. I have a nice little demonstration I have for you out in the dining room. But first, I want to give you the scripture basis for what I'm going to be saying. So let's start off. Remember, this is our diagram of the heroes over here and the villains over here, the ones who decide not to follow the instructions of Jesus. And so this is the tipping point that we call the median line between being hero on one side and villain on the other. We'll come back to that in just a second. But first, if you open your Bibles, I have mine tagged here so that I can turn right to it. It starts in Gospel of John, the 13th chapter. We're going to start with verse 34. Jesus is talking to his disciples on the very last hours with them before he's taken to his trial and eventually being crucified and buried for 3 days. Now, if you knew this was going to happen, if you were going to put yourself in Jesus' place, what would you try and get across to the people who were going to survive your life and live on after your passing? What would you do? You would boil down everything that you have ever said, every sermon, every parable, every miracle, every healing, every single thing, boil it down to its essence, and then make it absolutely clear. Okay? Here's what he says in John 13, verse 34. A new command I give you. Love one another. Period. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Period. By this, everyone will know you are my disciples, comma, if you love one another. Do you think he had a message he wanted to get across? You think he had a passion for what he was saying? I think he did. Let me just kind of walk through this with you, if you could. Jesus loved, all right? And the story of the message of God's only begotten Son coming to earth is a big, long love story. It's a love story of how God wants us to thrive. He wants us to be free of the burdens, free of the bondage, free of the guilt, free of the fear, free of the domination that keeps us feeling trapped in our sinful state. And so, in this beginning, he's just barely started this evening's time with them. He's just opened the discussion. And he says, here I have to say this, love one another. I have a command for you. Now, in Hebrew thought, you'll hear once in a while someone say, truly, truly, I tell you, or verily, verily, I tell you, depending on the translation. Truly, truly. What he's saying is, I swear that this is the truth. It will stand the test of time. If he says the same thing twice, he is like he's putting his hand with, as we might do, if you wanted to prove that you were sincere, by putting the hand on the Bible. He's saying, this command I'm going to say to you, love one another. That's one. As I have loved, you must love one another. That's two. They will know you are my friends as you love one another. He says it 3 times. Well, if saying it twice makes it clear he is absolutely serious, what does it mean that he says it 3 times? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. What does that mean? Anytime you say the same thing, the same phrase, the same idea 3 different times, he is insisting that not even all eternity, God himself, or any other thing, time, influences, changing circumstances, nothing will change this command for all time. You are commanded to love one another. Okay, that's pretty emphatic. By the time he said it the 3rd time, they were sitting up on the middle of their seats looking at him going, wow, we just got a ton of stuff laid in our laps. Okay, so he's very serious. All right, so he goes through, he has all kinds of messages. He tells them he's getting ready to leave for the Garden of Gethsemane. He's wrapping up his message. He's coming along. And then we get over into chapter 15, these are very important chapters. These are the moments he spends with his disciples at the very end of his life. Okay, now we're in 15. We're going to start with verse 12. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Did you think they didn't get it at the beginning? No. They got it at the beginning. He's starting over. He's repeating it for a 2nd time. He says it differently. This part's the same. But listen to what he says. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends, if you do what I command. And I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from the Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, I chose you. This is verse 17, now I jumped. This is my command: love each other. 3 times repeated at the beginning, 3 times repeated at the end. What was he trying to tell us? If you want to be a hero, love each other. That is the key. Not just once in a while. Not just occasionally. Make it a lifestyle. Okay, now I want to take a pause, and we're going to walk out into the dining room, and I have a demonstration for you over there of how we can judge whether or not we are following the guideline, the command, the orders that God gave us. I want to start with a machine that I have hanging from the ceiling fixture in my dining room. See that? That belonged to my grandfather. He was a carpenter, a home builder. And this is one of the tools that he left to me. Not very many people have seen this, and even fewer have used it. It's called a plumb line. And if you notice, the string comes right up through the center of the hole at the top of the plumb line. and everything is balanced. Everything is completely vertical. There's no to the left or to the right. It's perfectly straight up and down. Gravity pulls that very heavy weight straight down. So what is it used for? Well, he built homes in the 1920s when we didn't have a whole lot of technology stuff, and he was using simple tools, a lot of which I have in my collection, that you might have had building the pyramids or the gigantic carvings in the city of Petra, which I thoroughly enjoyed seeing them. And they started with a simple string hanging down the front of the mountain that hangs vertically, and then they just chipped away the mountain so that it matched the string. Now, when my grandfather had that hanging in the middle of the house, he could walk around that string and check to see if his construction was straight and true. You see how the corner of that wall there? It's kind of hidden a little out of focus. But if I line the string up against the side of that wall, I can tell whether or not it's plumb. And the laundry room, yeah, it's plumb. And the hallway, yeah, it's plumb. And, oh, here's one thing. Do you have trouble figuring out if your pictures are straight or not? Well, you hang a plumb line, and look at that. The frame is perfectly along the vertical line. It's as straight as a plumb line. And you can just stand here and walk around the room and say, okay, let's see. The china closet straight, because I had to shim it. It was leaning when we first set it there. And, oh, let's look at the posts on the deck that I built out there. Oh, look at that. They're not perfect, but you know they're awful close to being perfectly vertical. And here's the patio door. Yeah, that works. Sure, everything is plumb and vertical, whichever term you want to use, because it matches with the line of the plumb line, okay? I hope you enjoyed the little demonstration I had. I love giving children's sermons, and to do an effective children's sermon, it almost has to be something physical or something they can grab a hold of, a story or an object or something like that. You have to understand, I grew up as a kid watching Mr. Wizard, and almost nobody still alive remembers Mr. Wizard, but he was a very important part of my life as I was growing up because it gave me something tangible that I could understand one of the scientific principles, okay? This is a little closer look at that plumb line. It belonged to my grandfather, and it was, it's a part of my heritage. It is a very special tool because it helps to align everything that he, as a builder, was going to do to make sure that the building was strong, it was straight, it was together. Now, not every building is straight. I have to tell you, I lived for a year and a half in an apartment building on the second floor. I think it must have been a 3-story building. There was a basement too. I'm sure there was a basement underneath it too, as I remember now. But when we walked in, it was beautiful. They had just redone it, remodeled it, new carpets everywhere. The appliances were all new in the kitchen. Kitchen had been kind of, tweaked up and was beautiful inside, and it looked like a brand new apartment. It wasn't a brand new apartment, but it had the look and the feel and the smell of a nice new apartment. But something wasn't right. Something was off. The doors did not close in their door frames. The latches wouldn't work. And when you closed the door and then walked away, the door would slowly, gradually open. Or on the other side of the hallway, if you wanted it open, it would slowly close. And everything was just a little off. If you had an egg that you wanted to put on the countertop, it would begin at the beginning front of the countertop, and it would gradually roll toward the wall until it hit the backsplash. Thankfully, it didn't roll the other way and, fall off on the floor, but everything seemed a little off. And then one day I was sitting in the living part of the room, the apartment, and I noticed that the vertical blinds that were hanging over the patio door weren't hanging straight, or they didn't look straight to me. I looked at them. It was 1.5 inches difference from the top of the door to the bottom of the door. They weren't placed vertically. Well, it ended up they were vertical. It's that the house wasn't vertical anymore. As weird as that sounds, the foundation of the house had shifted, and the entire building was tipping 1.5 inches on the height of the wall from vertical to being no longer plumb. Okay? That's why the doors all opened and closed on their own. That's why everything seemed to roll downhill. I wondered, why don't the sinks drain like they're supposed to? Well, the sinks had been installed as the house had shifted. The water no longer ran to the lowest point, the drain of the sink. It puddled up in the corner. That's what happens when things aren't plumb. Years ago, when we were back in Missouri, we went to a fun house, and it was one of these things that was intentionally built all crazy so that you looked like you were real small when you went to one side of the room, and then you went to the other side of the room and you were real tall in perspective to the house and the room, and it looked like water was running uphill. But it was all done by building the building out of plumb, so that your eyes thought they were looking at vertical lines, but they weren't. They were all skewed. That's a lot of fun for a fun house. But it's not much fun to live in a house where you take a shower, and then after everything's finished, you have to splash the water down to the drain to empty the tub or the kitchen sink. Life is more difficult when things aren't plumb, vertical. Now, what I want to tell you is this. When you use the plumb line, it is the guide that helps us to remember that everything that we do and everything that we say, everything that makes our life possible, needs to be lined up on, guided along the side of, the pattern of Jesus Christ. When we accept him into our lives, we agree to follow his commands. I want to love you, and I want you to love as I have loved. Now, that isn't natural. That's not normal, because we are, at our core, people who want something for ourselves. We want a house. We want a nicer car. We want a different profession. We want to make some money so that we have a retirement. We want to be able to travel. We want to take the kids someplace. We want to enjoy life. We want a lot. The problem is, if we decide that what we want is more important than what Jesus commanded, we move from being over here in the area of hero over closer and closer to the median point here. We called it the tipping point last time. Sometimes people have accepted Jesus. Jesus tells the story of the parable of the seed that went on the path, the seed that went in the stony ground, the seed that went in the weeds and the tangle of stuff that grew up. And they don't bring the kind of harvest that he intended them to be. And what he was talking about is that instead of lining up everything that they wanted to be, they slid over here, more toward the middle. Let's just pretend. I've accepted Jesus. I think he loves me. I believe I have accepted him. But really, that's asking a lot to love like he loved. That's a little too much. It's over the top kind of thing. I don't really feel like that's my thing. I don't feel like I'm cut out for that. I don't know that I even like that idea in sometimes. Maybe if I'm just a nice person, I want to be a nice person. And if I kind of say, well, I'll do unto others as, I'd like to have them do that to me. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that makes Jesus happy enough that he can say, well, if I'm over here, I'm okay. But even that can be a little bit stressful. It can be difficult because when we are called on at work to do something that isn't really nice, or we have to say or do something that hurts people, you going to go along with that? Well, it's my job. I get paid for this. I guess I'm supposed to do this. If I'm going to keep my family taken care of, the compromises start to get difficult. And they only want me to have one drink socially. And the fact that, like in my case, every time I had one drink, I had too many. Well, but it's only one. I think I can deal with that. But I never did. Again and again and again, Jesus calls us to line up what we are doing with what he did, the way he loved, the way he lived. That's a challenge. It can only happen if God's Spirit helps us to see and understand how to do that. And it's a growing experience, and I'm still learning. I snap at people once in a while myself, and I regret it afterwards. I have to ask God to forgive me for being impatient or bad-tempered. But my goal, my thought, my desire is to be lined up with his plumb line, loving as he loved. Well, I mean, that'd still be a little bit too much demanding. Maybe if I just decide I'm going to be law abiding, I'm not going to break any laws. Will that be enough to, for what Jesus expects of me? Just not to be a lawbreaker? I'm not saying it's bad to live as a faithful citizen, a responsible person in your community. Man, we need a whole lot more people who decide they're going to live by the plumb line of the law. That isn't what Jesus asked. That isn't what he commanded. But I want to share with you that when we decide to slip away from what he commanded and move over toward the middle, we have slipped out of being hero. We've slipped out of being a faithful follower of his. And we're over here making compromises again. And the compromises just keep getting more profound. Let's take just a second, and I'm going to take you back out to the dining room, and we're going to see what it's like when something pushes or impacts or changes the plumb line and moves it and makes it not function as it was supposed to. Now, the plumb line is a perfect vertical line, but it does have a problem. It can be influenced. What do I mean by influenced? Well, even though gravity is a very powerful force, and the plumb line is very heavy. In fact, I had to kind of be careful because I wasn't sure it would stay there on the lamp, but it can be influenced by something outside of itself. Now watch what happens when I take the magnet and put it close to the plumb line. You see it start to move? See it be influenced? Whoa! Man, it really grabbed on. Oh, no. Let go. No, let go. Well, that's what's happening in places like Washington, D.C. now, in the Supreme Court. There are so many influences on the plumb line, it's hard to know what's straight and what isn't. Look at that. And people will say, well, what is the truth? What can the truth be? It could be this way one day and this in the next. Well, that doesn't make sense. That's not a true plumb line. I want what I want. I don't want to live with the rules or the restrictions of the plumb line. So we'll use the, what shall we call it? The Clarence Thomas rules of ethics. As long as you can get away with it, go ahead. Don't have to say you're sorry. Don't have to give back anything that you took by ill-gotten means. And finally, people get so confused, they look at it and say, well, the truth is useless. Nobody knows what the truth is. Nobody plays by the rules. Everybody's being manipulated. There is no truth. As good as the plumb line is, we're in a sinful world. And our sinful desires pull us away from what is true and honest and what is factual. If everything that happens is just because somebody wants it to be that way, nothing is true. Everything is confused. The zone is flooded with greed and pride and lust for power. And no one can say, well, those people who assaulted the Capitol, they weren't such bad people. They just... And the whole plumb line fails because we interject our own thoughts, desires, and sinful nature into what God had intended. Now, I had fun with those two very powerful magnets moving that steel plumb line back and forth. When you realize that's a very, very powerful, when you realize a powerful magnet can move that thing back and forth and it no longer functions as a plumb line. Now it's nothing more than a swinging pendulum or something, and it can be used to prove anything you want to. Well, we've got a lot of people who believe that they can make up their own rules, who can believe that they are just as smart as anybody else. Why would you want to live like Jesus said? He was a loser, wasn't he? Didn't he get himself killed? Why would you want to be a weakling, like someone who wouldn't even put up resistance when you're lied about and you're beat up? Aren't you supposed to jump back and hit just as hard or harder in retaliation? Aren't you supposed to take control and make the demands that you be treated right, that you get what you deserve? Come on. That's not being strong. That's being weak to just say, okay, I'll love you even then. I'll forgive you when you mistreat. That's not being a hero. A hero is strong enough that he makes demands. A hero is somebody who gets what they need for themselves. Well, unfortunately, that isn't the key to being a follower of Jesus. It just doesn't happen that way. You are on the path toward being a Judas. He wanted something. He even had decided it was a good thing that he wanted. He had decided that the poor would be better off with him in control. Was it ethical? No. Was it honest? No. But then, ethical, smarthical, who cares? As long as it's a good thing. And does it help me provide for my family too? Yeah, that's even better. Remember the congressman that they went in and found gold bars and hundreds of thousands of dollars stuffed into his shoes and stuffed around through the house? He had decided he was going to get what he wanted and what he needed. He's going to spend every day of the rest of his life behind bars. I mentioned Clarence Thomas. He's in a special situation because nobody can touch him because he can take all the money that people shovel to him, and there's no one who's going to drag him before the Supreme Court and get his friends, his fellow justices, to punish him. So he just kind of smiles and goes, well, that's the way life is. I found a way to get mine. It's up to you to find how to get yours. No. He has taken the 4-lane highway, the interstate superhighway, into being a villain. He will be forever, for the rest of all history, however long we survive on this planet, as being a turncoat, a traitor, and a villain. And anyone who follows his pattern of just getting what you want is going to join them. You can say anything you want to say. You can make any claims you want to make. You can try and justify yourselves. Remember Pilate when he convicted Jesus to death on the cross? He brought a bowl and he splashed his hands around in it and he kind of made a big show. Okay, I'm all clean now. I'm not have any guilt for what I've done. Somebody else did it. Jewish leaders did it. The Jewish people did it. The crowds made me do it. The government that I work for made me do this. The last governor didn't handle this like it should have been, so it made it harder for me, so I can blame him. Did it work? Didn't work. Anyone who can look at what happened to Jesus and kind of count those who were mean, those who were vicious, those who were cruel, those who were dishonest, those who bribed the crowd, members of the crowd, to say, crucify him, were going to be lined up as villains. Remember how they called out, give us Barabbas, give us Barabbas? They didn't think of that by themselves. They were told, I will give you a break. I'll give you my approval. I may even ask God to forgive more of your sins. They were priests, of course. If you do what I tell you to do. They even bribed the soldiers who witnessed the resurrection of Jesus to tell lies about it. Does that sound like a hero? In your mind, in your heart, do you want to be lined up with those folks? Do you want to be the one yelling, give us Barabbas? Crucify Jesus? Is that what you want? When you decide not to line up your life, your heart, your mind, your activities with the plumb line that Jesus gave us, and you want to turn that whole thing into chaos and explanations, and it's not so much about me, what if about this, and it's not as bad as over here, and I'm only just as, but it's those people over there that are really the problems. It's not anything I'm doing, it's somebody else that's doing it. No. It's just a bunch of phony baloney garbage. Jesus said, I give you my command. Love as I have loved. It's not easy. It's not always fun. Sometimes you turn the other cheek and they just take another swipe at you. But you want to end up being a hero or a chump? You want to be a hero or a phony? You want to be a hero when God looks at you at the end and says, well done, you were really cool out there. You really did the job. Or do you want somebody to say, get away from me, I never knew you. You were on your own the whole time. I want to be a faithful person in following Jesus, my Lord. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what it means to me, because the ones who love me will understand what I'm doing. And they will respect and they will honor that effort to be faithful to Him. And that's really the best thing I could say about the way to live. He lived what He taught. He walked the walk that matched His talk. He didn't say one thing and then do another. And Bob Douglas was a hero. You want that too? Jesus calls out to you and said, come on, follow me. Come on. Be one of my people. I'll take care of you. Come on, be one of my folks. Join me in changing the world. And I want to show you how much I love you for being a hero. Thank you for watching.